footage from the march showed Gideon Falter wearing a kippah, a head covering, and being told by the police officer he wouldn't let him cross the road because he looked quite openly Jewish. The Met apologised, but then had to apologise for its apology after the force suggested that those opposing the pro-Palestinian protests were provocative. Mr Falter and others called for the commissioner to resign, but the Prime Minister said he had confidence in Sir Mark, while urging the Met to do more to rebuild confidence with the Jewish community.
4 spears taken from an Aboriginal community by Captain Cook and the crew of the Endeavour when they first landed in Australia in 1770 are being repatriated. The weapons will be handed over at a ceremony at Trinity College, Cambridge today, following years of discussions. More from our culture reporter, Lorne Angie.
The spears were taken from the villages of the Gweagal people living at Cammy, the Aboriginal name for Botany Bay, in 1770 and given to Trinity College the following year. They've been held by Cambridge University's Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology since early in the 20th century. Trinity College made the decision to repatriate them after discussions between the museum and the La Perouse Aboriginal community, representatives of the Gweagal people and the broader Darawal Nation. Direct descendants of the Gweagal people who crafted the spears will be present at a handover ceremony in Trinity's Wren Library this morning.
NASA says its Voyager 1 probe, the most distant man-made object in the universe, has started sending useful information back to Earth again after months of spouting gibberish. Matthew Carter has more.
Voyager 1, which was launched in 1977, is currently more than 15 billion miles from Earth, but remarkably, it can still communicate with NASA, even if it does take nearly a day for messages to be sent or received. But in November last year, a malfunctioning chip in the craft's computer caused it to start sending back nonsense rather than useful scientific data. Engineers say that's now resolved, thanks to a clever coding fix. Voyager 1 is expected to continue collecting data until sometime after next year, when its batteries run out.
Thank you very much, Caroline. The time is 8:10. A bill is becoming law and the Prime Minister now has the legal tool that he wanted for his pledge to stop the boats. Channel crossings, however, are up in the first months of this year compared to the same period last year. The Prime Minister will be hoping that what he calls a regular rhythm of multiple flights to Rwanda over the summer and beyond changes that. Let's turn first to Tom Simons, our correspondent, who is right on the coast in Calais watching what's going on. Tom, what are you seeing?
Michelle, we've had quite a busy morning here. We arrived about an hour and a half ago. All was quiet, and as we were watching, a small black boat appeared around the corner of the headland, about half full with people wearing high visibility jackets, and then from the dunes we were standing on, a large group of about 30 more migrants raced across the beach to the water and started to get into that boat as it came into shore. The police were behind them. They stopped some of them getting on the boat. Others did manage to get on board. We counted about 65 to 70 migrants on board a very small black inflatable vessel. They then started an outboard motor and headed out to sea. But we're watching now, and there's a large military vessel that appears to be blocking their passage across the channel. And the small boat we've been watching has come back into shore. Another small group of migrants who were left behind appear to be going back to meet it. So kind of an unusual situation. Normally they get across the channel as quickly as they can. The conditions are perfect today. This isn't the only beach. There are launches happening today. We have another BBC team down the coast that has seen another boat attempt to get onto the water. So here, today, this morning, the boats haven't been stopped. But of course, there's a much wider channel of people coming across the world to get to this point, to try to get to the UK. And clearly the government hopes that they will be dissuaded by the change in legislation.
Tom, briefly, has the word gone out to people such as those in Calais about the Rwanda bill, now the Rwanda law?
Yes, they do know about it in the camps. A team was here last week and spoke to a lot of people about Rwanda, about what would happen. It was interesting. A lot of people didn't really seem to understand how the quite complicated system that has been set up by the government would operate. There was a lot of misunderstanding about whether they could go to Rwanda and then apply to come to the UK, which they can't, or that they might go to Rwanda and at some point be allowed to go to the UK in the future. Again, not possible under the legislation the government has put in place.
Tom Simons in Calais, thank you very much. Well, the number of people people that the new law could potentially apply to is nearly 52,000 arrivals since July 2023, under a previous law saying that small boat and other irregular arrivals must be removed rather than have asylum applications heard here. Before we hear from a minister, let's turn to last night in the aftermath of the Lords finally giving up on trying to amend this bill. The crossbench peer, Lord Anderson, spoke to us after the parliamentary back and forth concluded.
We took the view eventually, as we nearly always do, that we had to acknowledge the primacy of the elected House and withdraw from the fray. It is now the government's bill. It bears very few signs of influence from anybody else, and we'll just have to hope that, as well as the considerable costs that I think go with this bill, costs in money but also costs in reputation, it may bring at least some of the benefits that are hoped for from it.
And Lord Carlisle, also a crossbencher and a former independent reviewer of terror legislation, said this.
In my view, it's a bad bill. It's a very expensive way of dealing with a very small cohort of refugees and potential asylum seekers. The government refused to tell us this evening whether because of airline contract, we don't know if they've got pilots. Also, the Labour Party has told us that they will repeal the bill on election if that's what happens in any event. I think this bill is going to be a Pyrrhic victory by the government.
And in our Westminster studio now is Michael Tomlinson, who's the Minister for Countering Illegal Migration. Good morning to you. Now that you've got the law, when do the first people get notified of their removal?
Well, that's going to happen shortly. It's going to happen soon. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, 10 to 12 weeks before the first flights take off, there's a process that has to happen between now and then. You referred last night to the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and I was standing there in the chamber of the House of Lords shortly after midnight, listening to Lord Anderson and others, as they rightly, in my view, gave way to the primacy of the House of Commons. But now we need to make sure that it gets royal assent. We need to get the treaty in place. And then there are several steps that have to happen before those first flights take off in 10 to 12 weeks.
Have you identified people already in the first tranche for removal?
That happens imminently. I'm sure you
haven't yet. You've been waiting. This bill has taken longer than you hoped to become law. Are you saying you still haven't identified the first people to be removed?
Michelle, respectfully, you have to get the bill through first. Once the bill has become an act, it's then in law, and that's when the process can start. If the act isn't in force, then respectfully, you can't start a process under the act.
You can't even identify people. I mean, there are people who we know, nearly 52,000, who are in limbo because they've arrived in the period in which they cannot apply for asylum here. So you've got a large pool of people to choose from.
That's right, and that work is happening and will continue to happen. But when the act, when the bill becomes an act, when it gets royal assent, that's when the work can start. The caseworkers need to get their final training. We've identified 200 of our best caseworkers. They're then going to get on with the painstaking and difficult. No, because the bill passed to Michelle. You've asked the question. Michelle, respectfully, you asked the question. You asked the question with an incredulous tone in your voice, and I'm trying to answer it, and then you interrupt me. Yes, the bill passed it last night, and shortly after midnight. I said I was standing there in the chamber of the House of Lords. Shortly after midnight, it's got to receive royal assent. Once it's received royal assent, that means that it's in force, that it is part of our law, and then the next stage of the process can happen, and that's exactly what is going to happen. You've heard the Prime Minister's determination. You've heard my determination. We have not been waiting. Frankly, it's been the Labour Lords who have been delaying this. It's the Labour Party who have been delaying this. Labour seem to be more interested in stopping the flights. We want to stop the boats.
These were largely crossbench peers and senior legal figures in the House of Lords. My question, by the way, was about the work that one would have imagined has been going on behind the scenes to get ready for the moment. Do you have an airline contract?
Michelle, a huge amount of work has been going on behind the scenes. The work has been going on day and night. Home Office officials, ministers, the Prime Minister, there has been a huge amount of work.
Why aren't they ready to go then?
Because there is a period of time, as the Prime Minister set out very clearly last night, during the course of his press conference, there is a period of time of 10 to 12 weeks before those first flights can happen. And actually, I share your impatience. I would love a flight to take off tomorrow, not because I want this deterrent effect to be up and running as quickly as possible. I want the planes to take off as quickly as possible,
Do you have an
because that will
airline
help us
contract?
to stop the boats. Planes have been booked, airfields have been booked, but forgive me, I'm not
An
going to.
airline?
Forgive me, I'm not going to get into details, more details. I understand
I'm
why.
not asking which airline it is. I'm just saying, do you have an airline contract? That's honestly just a yes or no. It sounds as if you don't.
We have planes booked, we have an airfield booked, but respectfully, Michelle, let me explain. There are those who are determined to stop this come what may. There are those who are determined to put obstacles in our way, whatever obstacles they are, whether they're legal or whether it's via pressure or via whatever means. And therefore, the more information, the more details that I reveal to you and to your listeners, who are understandably interested in this area, but the more detail I give you, respectfully gives more ammunition to those who simply want this policy to fail. The Labour
There
Party...
are two ways to look at that. Equally, you give more detail, you show clearly the work that you've done, the intent that you have, and actually the actual practical work that's going to make these a reality. So then, if you've given that...
sure that this bill will not work.
This is your chance to put some information out there then, perhaps to try and head off some of those. If you're a victim of torture, can you still be removed under this?
Rwanda is a safe country, and yes, it will be possible to remove those to Rwanda.
Understood. So any victim of torture, no point applying on that basis. Victim of trafficking?
Rwanda's a safe country, Michelle. I'm not going to... You could go through a whole raft of this. You could
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying because personal
Listen, Michelle,
circumstances...
this is rather frustrating.
Hang on.
You've asked me a question, and you could ask me a series of questions. Could you do this challenge? Could you do that? You could ask me an infinite number of challenges. You could say, right, well, here's the handbook of all the... You're not going to get that clarity, because the Act hasn't yet come into force. There is not royal assent.
You're trying to stop the legal challenges, aren't you? For example, that's why a lawyer could just say, okay, well, if my client is a victim of torture, there's no point applying on that basis because that doesn't rule them out. Whatever physical or mental state they are in, they're still eligible to be on the plane to Rwanda.
Michelle, respectfully, I think regardless of what I say, there are likely to be legal challenges. And I've said that, and I've been clear about that. It's not your question, Michelle, but it's my answer.
This law rules people out or leaves them continuing to be eligible. That's what I'm trying to clarify. It's how you're going to use this law, because you've got it now.
Well, we've got the law, and the law means that planes can take off to Rwanda. And why is that important? It's important because the deterrent effect needs to kick in and to work to stop the small boats crossing the channel. We've seen fatalities in the channel. We've seen people dying trying to cross the channel. We've seen people smuggling gangs, profiting on the back of misery. That is why the Prime Minister is so determined, and that's why I am determined to ensure that this policy works. There will be legal challenges, Michelle. You are absolutely right. I'm not going to go through a line by line of the possibilities of the ins and outs of all the multifarious legal challenges that there possibly could be. There will be legal challenges. We will meet them, and the planes will take off.
And how can you be so sure that there will be a deterrent effect, given what we just heard from Calais and what we also know from the numbers that boat crossings are up this year compared to the same period last year?
Well, let me give you two examples. One is Australia and the other is Albania.
Neither of them are relevant to this context. So I'm going to ask you to look at
Michelle,
our context. Well, we had a minister making exactly those points yesterday. So
I've made the point before. You asked me a question.
Some evidence
well, let me give you some
based
evidence.
on
Let me
this
give some concrete. Let me give some concrete evidence. Albanian crossings are down by 90% since the Prime Minister brought that agreement into force. You're right. It's not exactly the same as the Rwanda. You are right. It's not exactly the same. as the Rwanda scheme. It's different because the Albania scheme were returning Albanians to Albania, but the deterrent effect is the same because people from Albania have seen that it's not worth their while getting onto a small boat. We now see almost no one. This is good news, Michelle. We see almost no one from Albania getting onto a small boat, making that perilous journey across, because the deterrent effect is up and running. It's the same principle. It's not exactly the same model, but it's the same principle that's going to work, and that is the concrete evidence that the scheme.
Well, it's completely different because people are not going back to their own countries. They're not being sent, are they? From they're not Rwandans being put on planes to Rwanda. So it's completely different. Let me ask you about the people that are in limbo.
It's a different scheme. The deterrent effect is the same.
This is a really important point about the 50,000 people who are not in our asylum system because under the law you passed last year they cannot apply for asylum here, so they're effectively in limbo. Are they all scheduled for deportation to Rwanda or to another country under which you might have a similar scheme in the future?
Yes, that's right. The Illegal Migration Act, as it now is, as you rightly say, it came into force in July of last year. And when it's fully enforced, that's when the duty to remove on the Home Secretary will kick in.
So if you're re-elected, you will remove all those 50,000 people over how long?
Well, again, let me give you a concrete example. The Prime Minister said yesterday he wants to see a regular rhythm of flights to Rwanda. That's how the deterrent effect will kick in.
How long does it take to get 50,000 people off then under the schedule that the Prime Minister envisages?
Well, in terms of the schedule, there will be regular flights, and let me give you an example. There are thousands who have been removed to Albania. I know you don't like Albania as a comparison, but it's a good example because there have been regular flights.
How long does it take to get 50,000 people to Rwanda?
I haven't done the mathematics. I'm sure you can do the mathematics.
I don't know because I can't, because you're not telling me how many people are going to go every month. Actually, we have no way of working it out.
Well, that's because I can't tell you that, because the answer is we want to get regular flights off. That's what we want. Actually, it's important to say for the Albania scheme, the numbers started off small. They were modest numbers at first, but after a period of time, we've now seen thousands of people who have taken off to go back to Albania. But the point is, it's the deterrent effect. That's the key. We're wanting to stop the boats crossing. We don't just want to deal with those who are here. Of course we want to deal with them, but we want to do more than that. We want to stop those who are crossing. That is the key to the deterrent effect. Labour seem more determined to stop the flights. We are determined to stop the boats.
Thank you.
8. Change of focus now. Human beings have made some amazing things, all of which will die one day with us. When the earth dies, which it will, in fire and ice, as the poet put it. But there is something with all of us represented in it that will survive. Voyager 1, the spacecraft launched in 1977, will not die with us. It will go on, perhaps forever, whatever that means. And there is great joy in space watchers that, having given up the ghost when it comes to communicating with us, it has started communicating again from 15 billion miles away and counting. It continues to glide through space with its cargo of gold-plated vinyl LPs containing the recordings of Beethoven, Bach, Chuck Berry as well, along with greetings in 55 languages. That was the sound of the golden record that was put on board Voyager 1 when it was launched all those years ago, in the hope, if not the expectation, that people, things that one day found it, might possess gramophone record players. Anyway, I've been talking to Cameron Portico, who is a planetary scientist, former member of the Voyager imaging team. First, about the efforts to get proper two-way comms up and running again.
Well, they have to first, fix it. They know what the problem is. They've determined that they will be able to fix it, but they haven't fixed it yet. But what we haven't been receiving is just information certainly from the science instruments, and there are instruments on board Voyager that basically sense the environment that it's in. And remember, we've been doing this with Voyager 1 since 2012 after it broke through the magnetic bubble of the sun and it entered interstellar space. And that was a big moment. And that's when they knew they were in interstellar space, and we're learning things about interstellar space, the strength of the magnetic fields, the concentrations of particles, and so on. And this is exploration.
Voyager 1 is 15 billion miles away now, isn't it? What is it?
Yes.
How long do you think it can carry on? If it's fixed, how long can it carry on telling us things?
Well, what will limit this will likely be, unless it has a catastrophic failure where it does just never talk anymore and they don't know if they can't do anything about it. But if it dies a natural death, let's call it that, it will be because its power supply, the RTGs, the radioactive sources that are keeping it powered, they just peter out. Their strength grows weaker and weaker and weaker with time, and they're just not going to be powerful enough anymore to even drive the limited activities that the Voyagers are doing now. So I think the expectation is that it will die within the next 5 years. They're trying very hard to just keep it going, and we all want to see it continue because there was no other mission like Voyager. Voyager was, I don't think it's too much to say, it was the greatest voyage of exploration that humanity had ever conducted. It's likely to continue after we're gone.
Which is an amazing thought.
It's an amazing thought, and it's not foolish to feel that those spacecraft, gifted us with some measure of immortality because of that. And it's just such an exalting feeling to think that something that we touched is gonna, just be carrying on. And, if you're into that kind of thing, it's just a wonderful thing.
And it has messages from us, doesn't it? Or from us in the 1970s for anything, anyone that finds it.
Yes, not only was Voyager just a daring, endless trek to the outer planets and beyond, which is, what it was designed to do, is just study the outer planets, show us what was there in the outer solar system, which was so far, away and beyond our reach at the time, and not only did it do that, pass through the houses of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, and not only did it return all that fabulous information and show us what our solar system is really like, but it had this very beautiful human-forward countenance in carrying a golden record of images and music and sounds that were representative of our planet, and that included spoken greetings in 55 languages. And, is it likely anyone will pick it up? Probably not, but that didn't matter because it still was our attempt at a connection. It was a message from Earth vectored into the Milky Way, and it's still carrying that message. It's a beautiful thought. It's a lovely thing, to think about at the end of the day.
Carolyn Porco, former member of Voyager Imaging Team. Thank you very much.
And that takes us to Mike Williams with the sport. Mike.
Michelle, thank you. We're talking this hour about one of, if not the longest relationship in British sport between a team and its home ground.
On now to North, where more than 30,000 besieged the ground. Middlesex was soon piling up the runs against Sussex. Meanwhile, Dennis Cutlass saw to it that the crowd got value for their money with a brilliant century that later became 182.
Test match special sounded a little different, didn't it, 75 years ago? We are, though, talking about Middlesex County Cricket Club and its 160-year tenure at Lords. They have played at the home of cricket since their foundation in 1864, but their chief executive has revealed that the club are considering moving away to a newly developed, purpose-built cricket venue in northwest London. Well, let's talk to Stefan Szymański, who is Professor of Sport Management at the University of Michigan and author of Crickonomics, the Anatomy of Modern Cricket. Stefan, thanks for speaking to us.
Hi, nice to be with you.
So, important to clarify that Middlesex are tenants at Lords, which is owned by the MCC. And their chief executive, Andrew Cornish, where these quotes have come from, does clarify that nothing is imminent here. But to even talk about ending a 160-year relationship is quite significant, isn't it?
Oh yeah, but in some ways it's not surprising, because if you imagine, if you've been a tenant for 150 years, at some point you want to own your own home, right? That's the real problem that Middlesex have. They really struggle to generate any income because they're just paying a rental fee for where they play, and they can't organise any other events in order to generate supplementary income.
Middlesex might, though, argue, Stefan, that like any landlord-tenant arrangement, there are some benefits to them not owning the property. For example, if Lords needs some redevelopment, it's presumably the MCC who pay for it and Middlesex who reap the benefits.
Well, Middlesex would, I'm sure they'd be quite happy to swap positions with MCC and let MCC become the tenant and they would become the owner. I mean, this shows up in the size of the business. MCC, which doesn't play county cricket, generates an annual income of about £60 million, whereas Middlesex barely generates £8 million a year. So you can see the scale of the difference, and that's because the opportunities that prime real estate in central London really gives to MCC.
Andrew Cornish has floated the idea of Middlesex still playing some games at Lords, hasn't he? The marquee fixtures in their season, perhaps. He makes a comparison to Harlequins in rugby union, who are based at the Stoop but occasionally played big matches at Twickenham. Would that model work here, do you think?
Well, frankly, I think this is a bargaining ploy. I think the problem for Middlesex is they're strapped for cash, and they'd like to cut the rental fee that they're paying to MCC, and this is one way of putting some pressure on them.
And just on a wider point, on this romantic notion that we have here in the UK of our sports teams having such an emotional connection to their home ground, the venue where they play their home matches, this is perhaps more of a British phenomenon, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So in the United States, it's perfectly common for teams in a league to threaten to leave town and go move to another city if the local government won't build them a new stadium. In the British sporting scene, that's always been seen as unacceptable. Of course, in the football case, we had MK Dons move from Wimbledon, and still to this day, although that happened 20 years ago, many people have not forgiven them. So it is generally seen as being a sign of disloyalty to move, although, again, in the case of Middlesex, since they don't actually own the ground, and because they could claim to have a wider territory, they have some argument to say that they could maybe play a few games elsewhere. The question is, does anybody really want to go see them anywhere else other than Lords?
It's a fair point, but we'll have to leave it there. Cricket author Stefan Szymański there on the future of Middlesex at Lords. Finally, the tips. Talking of long sporting residences, they've been racing at Epsom since 1661. Here are two horses to look out for there this afternoon. The first at 2:10, number 9 Lihu, and then at 2:45, number 1 Arabic Legend.
I think they'd have reached the winning post by now. Anyway, thanks, Mike. The Life Scientific is on this morning at 9. Here's Jim Alcalini.
Hello, what is the universe made of, and where does space dust come from? Also, how might one create an informative yet entertaining show about Sir Isaac Newton? All questions that my guest today can answer. Mike Edmonds is an Emeritus Professor of Astrophysics at Cardiff University and President of the Royal Astronomical Society. His achievements have ranged from interpreting the chemical makeup of galaxies to decoding the world's oldest known astronomical artifact. I'll be talking to Mike in front of an audience at the Royal Astronomical Society in London. Join us after the news here on Radio 4 or catch up on BBC Sounds. And who knows, Sir Isaac himself might even make an appearance.
The weather, sunny spells in the north and west today, cloudier to the southeast with rain for a time.
You're listening to Today on Radio 4 with Michelle Hussein and Justin Webb. It is 24 minutes to 9. Caroline Nichols has the news.
The United Nations has called on the UK to rethink its flagship Rwanda Safety Bill, which has been passed by Parliament after a marathon tussle between MPs and members of the House of Lords. Rishi Sunak has described it as a landmark moment, but human rights groups say the bill breaches international law. The Rwandan government said it was looking forward to welcoming those relocated to the country. The Minister for Countering Illegal Migration, Michael Tomlinson, told us the first flights would take off in 10 to 12 weeks, but officials hadn't yet identified the people who would be on them, and care workers still needed to be trained. But he insisted planes and airfields had been booked. The French Coast Guard has said an operation is underway in the Channel following a failed crossing attempt by migrants. Unconfirmed reports say at least 5 migrants have died. The Prime Minister will meet his Polish counterpart Donald Tusk in Warsaw this morning and pledge an extra £500 million for Ukraine. He'll also hold talks with the head of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg. The Metropolitan Police has agreed that an independent force should review the Stephen Lawrence murder investigation. It comes after calls by his mother, Baroness Lawrence, for the inquiry to be reopened.
Thank you. It is 23 minutes to 9. Hugh Edwards no longer works for the BBC. The statement announcing that was terse, to put it mildly. After 40 years of service and a hugely successful career in which he became one of the best-known faces on the TV, the corporation merely said that it had accepted his resignation made on the basis of medical advice. It all began, of course, with an allegation in The Sun last year that he had paid money to a young person for images from that person. Let us talk to David Yellen, former editor of The Sun and co-host of the podcast When It Hits the Fan. David, good morning to you.
Good morning, Justin.
It is sad, isn't it? And I think a lot of people, that will be where it ends, really. It is a desperately sad story. Do you think there's anything the BBC could have done differently that might have changed the outcome?
Well, there clearly were issues which the BBC have looked into and admitted around the initial complaint made by the parents of the young person involved. So yes, I think in that respect, the BBC does need to look at it.
And the BBC has accepted that hasn't
Absolutely.
it, when it comes to complaints, and is going to change. But more widely than that?
Look, for 30, 40 years, maybe longer, there has been a battle in this country between Rupert Murdoch and the BBC and other proprietors, and this whole issue needs to be looked at in that context, in my opinion, and The Sun has won and the BBC has lost, and to a very large degree the young person involved, and certainly the stepfather and the person's mother and Hugh Edwards are collateral damage in that battle.
A battle fought, though, over something that seems not to have been. Indeed, the police have said quite clearly they're not investigating. There was no criminal behaviour. We don't have any suggestion within the BBC that there's been any behaviour that is criminal. Indeed, the investigation may well still be going on. We don't know that either. Do you think Hugh himself has been badly treated?
To a large degree, I think he has, yes. I think one of the problems with public life in this country at the moment is the charabanc moves on so quickly in the age of social media. We forget where we started. So it might be instructive to go back to where we started. Where we started was the Sun's initial allegations, where that a top BBC star paid a child, they used the word child, for sex pictures and, quote-unquote, could be charged by cops and face years in prison. The young person involved denied the allegations, but that denial was not printed. Now, I'm not saying that Hugh Edwards didn't do anything wrong. What I'm saying is he didn't break the law, but that was the implication. And if we remember, there were 5 days, and you remember this very well, Justin, with because of course Hugh was not named. He was only named by Vicky Flynn, his wife, 5 days later. So everybody from Jeremy Vine, Lineker, and many people that are in the public life, in broadcasting, had to distance themselves. It was a nightmare, but this was done on purpose. This was a brilliantly honed attack by The Sun, if I may say so, on the BBC. They knew precisely what they were doing, and it has resulted in the end of Hugh's career, which is it deserved? I have to say, I don't think it is, but I also don't think that Tim Davie, the Director General and the BBC, had much choice either, and that's why I say the attack was extremely well honed.
The latest edition of your podcast is out now, isn't it? You've got an interview with Matthew Freud. Tell us more about that.
Yes, I mean, Matthew actually is on BBC Sounds now. It's actually on Radio 4 this afternoon at 4:30. And Matthew, who obviously knows a thing or two about these things, we talk about, you know, the bullies in the playground, which is what the tabloids are. And obviously, I used to edit one of these things, and he was married to the proprietor for quite a long time. So the conversation is pretty extraordinary, I think. You know, it allows us, both of us, and Simon Lewis, my co-presenter, to look back on our lives and careers and just ask the question: have the tabloids and has Rupert Murdoch? What we actually ask him: what is Rupert Murdoch's net contribution to the world? I won't tell you what he says. You have to listen to find out. But the issue that we're talking about now is very much in the middle of this, which is, yes, it is probably right that Hugh Edwards goes. Why is it that the BBC and Tim Davie have not poured praise on Hugh this morning? Because he does deserve praise for his 40-year career. The answer is, they know that if they did that, they would be buried in these very newspapers. So they've not been able to do that. I'm sure privately they have. But publicly it would be, and that's just one small example of how the game, of how the sort of these bullies in our society have changed. Now I know that listeners might say, hang on a minute, Davie used to be the editor. Well, it's because I had that experience that I have the perspective.
Davie, thank you, and you've very admirably trailed your own podcast, and I'm much more I can say. It's already on BBC Sounds and it's on Radio 4 later. David Young, thanks.
18 minutes to 9. 4 spears are being repatriated today from the UK to the La Perouse Aboriginal community in Australia. They're thought to be part of 40 to 50 spears that were taken from Aboriginal people by James Cook when he landed at Botany Bay in 1770. We're joined from Cambridge by Ray Ingrie, director of the Gajaga Foundation, which is an organisation aimed at preserving the La Perouse Aboriginal community's culture, and also by Professor Nicholas Thomas, who's director of the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology in Cambridge, where the spears have been held. Good morning, both of you. Ray, first of all, I think you've come over especially from Australia for this ceremony. What's the significance of the spears?
The 4 spears are the only spears that are remaining from the spears that were taken by the crew of the Endeavour in 1770. And we've worked with Trinity College here in Cambridge to be able to showcase them in Australia, and after that positive relationship, the discussion of ownership happened. So we're over here to bring them back to Botany Bay and have them just